Biden's challenge. When Joe Biden enters the Oval Office later this month, he'll face multiple crises and a nation deeply divided. By Patricia Smith. On January 20th, Joseph R. Biden Jr. is expected to take the oath of office and become the nation's 46th president. On that day, he'll address the nation. Afterward, he'll face what is arguably the most alarming set of crises any incoming president has been up against in modern times. The COVID-19 pandemic is surging throughout the nation, overwhelming many hospitals. Amid virus-related shutdowns, the economy is struggling to recover. Experts are calling it the worst economic collapse since the Great Depression, and there's a possibility that it could still get worse. Beyond that, there's a deep divide between Americans. Some rejoiced at Biden's victory, while others continue to support President Trump. Biden is just one human, and the amount that's coming onto his plate as president is huge, says Kathleen Hall Jamieson, director of the Annenberg Public Policy Center at the University of Pennsylvania. Biden said in November that the situation demands that Americans put politics aside. We have to come together to heal the soul of this country so that we can effectively address this crisis as one country, he said. Political experts say that for Biden to be successful, he'll have to do two things at the same time. First, he'll have to juggle everything in his inbox. He must also repair the division that threaten the ability of the federal government to function effectively. At the very least, he'll have to patch up the rifts. Here's a look at 6 of the biggest challenges facing the next president. Number 1. COVID-19 pandemic, an unprecedented health crisis. Public health experts expect the pandemic to be its worst just after Biden takes office. Tackling this crisis will likely be the new president's top priority. He's going to inherit a situation where things are awful, predicts Ashish Jha, dean of the Brown University School of Public Health. Hospitals will be totally exhausted. You'll have massive shortages of supplies. You'll have a large number of doctors and nurses who are sick and many health systems on the verge of collapse. Biden moved swiftly after his electoral victory. He appointed a panel of public health experts to guide his decision-making on COVID-19. He also announced he'll call on all Americans to wear face masks to slow the spread of the virus. His plans for addressing COVID include significantly expanding testing and the production of personal protective equipment. He's vowed to listen to the advice of scientists, and he's committed himself to doing whatever it takes to stop the pandemic from continuing to spread across the country. In November, 2 drug companies announced that early results from trials showed their vaccines to be more than 90% effective. Other drug companies are also making headway with more vaccine trials. But this good news creates a huge logistical problem for the Biden administration. It will have to figure out how to safely and fairly get those vaccines to the 330 million Americans who need them. Some public health officials say that besides national coordination, there's a lot the president can do just by giving consistent, accurate information. As Dr. Howard Markle, a professor of history of medicine at the University of Michigan, puts it, it's important for the president to use the powers of persuasion and moral example. Number 2, the economy. Lost jobs and struggling businesses. Before COVID-19 struck, the nation's economy had been booming. The coronavirus first surged in the U.S. last spring. At that time, most of the economic activity in communities came to a halt. The move, which aimed to stop the spread of the virus, led to 22 million Americans losing their jobs in the spring. After that massive initial plunge, there were signs of recovery. Among them was the fact that millions of jobs returned. But experts say that we're a long way from a healthy economy, and the pandemic spiked again this fall, prompting new closures. Businesses such as airlines, restaurants, hotels, and theaters have been particularly hard hit. They'll take a long time to recover. The basic problem is that we put the economy into a medically induced coma, says David Wessel, director of the Hutchins Center for Fiscal and Monetary Policy at the Brookings Institution. Biden's economic problem is COVID. Get the pandemic under control, and you've pretty much addressed the problem. Beyond trying to get people back to work, Biden has a broader economic agenda. He wants to spend big on infrastructure, healthcare, and tackling climate change. He also plans to invest in science and technology research. To fund these initiatives, he'll likely seek to raise taxes on the wealthiest Americans and on corporations. But to make that happen, he'll need to get legislation through a closely divided Congress. Number 3. Climate change, the environment, addressing a global crisis. Biden says he'll rejoin the Paris Climate Accord. President Trump had withdrawn the U.S. from the International Climate Change Agreement. Rejoining only requires a letter to the United Nations and would take effect 30 days later. But scientists say other Biden environmental goals won't be so easy to achieve. During the past 4 years, the Trump administration erased or loosened nearly 100 rules and regulations on pollution in the air, water, and atmosphere. The rationale was that they were too hard on American businesses. Climate scientists say that the global level of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere has reached a critical point. Now, Biden wants to reverse many of Trump's environmental policies. Scientists say it's now going to be much more difficult to prevent many of the most damaging effects of climate change. That includes rising sea levels, deadlier storms, and more devastating heat waves, droughts, and wildfires. We've lost very important time on climate change, which we can ill afford, says Richard Newell, president of Resources for the Future, a nonpartisan energy and environment-focused research organization in Washington. There is severe damage. As a candidate, Biden laid out a plan to spend $2 trillion to develop clean energy and cut emissions from the power sector by 2035. Republicans are unlikely to go along with that kind of spending for big climate initiatives. Despite that, Biden's team is making it clear that climate change will be a priority. We have to reestablish American leadership globally on climate change, says Ernest Moynier, a former energy secretary who is advising Biden. And reestablishing global leadership is going to require getting our environmental house in order domestically.